Okay. Tutavach Shavua Tov. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nהיה bidvarei. L'chaim, everybody. L'chaim, l'chaim l'bracha.
Yeah, right on
Time.
You know, because Moses tarried, got the whole golden calf. You're not perfect timing. It looks like though we might have managed without our IT expert. You're such a good teacher that maybe I got it right. We'll find out. All right, good to welcome everybody and welcome. A double portion, Tazria and Matzaira. They're really, related to each other. The both parshas at great length speak about tsaras. Tsaras we translate as leprosy, but it's not modern day leprosy. That for sure not, as we will see. It's a skin disease. It's a skin disease, and not just a skin disease, but it's a disease also on your clothes. And not only on your clothes, but you can get it on the bricks in your home. That there'll be a discoloration of skin, clothing, or bricks in the home. And one needs to bring a kohen to make the declaration. Why a kohen? Because he's kind. Kohen blesses the people. Why? Because of the kind soul that they are. And as a result, because of the kind soul, you know what kind souls do? They are more lenient in how they see the world. More, easy, if you will, not as strict. So they are the ones, the Torah says, that they should be the one to make the declaration of whether this is indeed impure or not impure. If there isn't clarity, then what happens? If it's the home, then it has to be closed up for a week. And the kohen will come back. If it spread the lesion, this discolored look, then it becomes impure. If it's again not definitive, another week, 6 days actually. And then after that, either it is definitively impure or not. Then it becomes pure, right? If it faded, and so on. Not going to go through all the verses here. Let me just share over here. Right. And as we will see later, Rambam explains, Rashi explains also. Rashi explains that this tsaras is a punishment primarily for lashon hara, for gossip. Right. So on the skin, as we will learn more about it, it's only skin deep, right? It's not a
Eternal.
It's not internal. Exactly. Thank you. It's not internal, which we will learn later about gossip. Gossip is not internal. It's external. What does that mean? It's external. Why would that be? We'll learn more about that. All right. All right. And the question is, that question of the day, how do you avoid gossip? Lashon hara. One of the things that is almost impossible, I should say it's impossible, but very difficult. Why is that? Why is that? All right. We're going to do all of this, learning about Tsaras, in the context of understanding Rashi, because that's our focus this year in Torah studies is to take apart a Rashi and to understand the teachings of Rashi. So what we go through is the technical understanding of a verse in the Torah, Rashi, his explanation on it, and then from there we jump into, the deeper mystical meaning, if you will. Now, some rules of Rashi that we have spoken about in the past, but well, again, Rashi assumes that his students are at least 5 years old. We may not be yet 5, okay? At least I'm not. The rest of you, I'm not. Because he expects that you're going to remember what you learned earlier, and he's going to build his lessons on what he taught earlier. So in other words, he's not going to repeat. Even though sometimes Rashi does repeat, and that itself is sometimes a question. But he not necessarily will repeat something that he said earlier, so he expects us to know that, right? Second rule, Rashi always seeks an explanation consistent with the basic understanding of the passage. In other words, it's not going to be based on mystical meaning, even though there is mystical meaning in Rashi. It's called Yain Shel Rashi, the wine of Rashi, right? Just as wine brings out the secrets of the person, so there's wine in Rashi's teachings. But he's not coming for that purpose. He's coming to teach us the simple meaning. In the simple meaning, there's great layers of depth, right? But that's his goal. Pshuta shel mikra. Third thing, Rashi addresses every textual discrepancy. If there's a discrepancy Rashi has not addressed, it is either not a severe discrepancy or Rashi resolved it in a different way. Now, it's not head on dealing it with in the particular verse, but he has dealt with it. And the fourth thing is when Rashi quotes a teaching from our sages, he often adapts it to the most literal reading of the passage. When we observe significant adaptations, we ask how these changes help us understanding the passage. Others like this. In one word, how would you describe Judaism?
Knowledge.
Knowledge, okay. What? Spiritual, good.
Godly.
Godly, good.
Holiness.
Holiness, okay, good. Wendy? Difficult. Oh my gosh, Judaism is difficult. I never heard that one before.
Oh.
Okay. Okay. It's all correct what you said. There is this is my thing. There's no such thing, one word, what's Judaism. But I would say it's a tradition. And tradition means it's something that's handed down from generation to generation, from teacher to student, from parent to child. And that is the ideal of Judaism, right? So, in other words, nothing's in a vacuum. The teachings aren't in a vacuum. They come from somewhere, right? Well, all ultimately comes from God at Sinai. And we have the verse in the Torah, right? But when Rashi, who's the oral tradition, he didn't begin the oral tradition, right? Where did he get it from? What does that mean? He's Torah. It's all Torah. What does that mean? Well, he's going to get it from the Gemara, from the Talmud. He's going to get it from the Medrash, right? He's going to get it from previous teachers and teachings, right? Not coming up like this makes sense to me. This is the meaning over here and so on. So it'll be based on previous teachings, right? So he will take from a Medrash, but he's not bound by the Medrash. Why? Why is he not bound by the measures of previous teachings? Shouldn't he be bound by it?
Yeah, but if he wants to make his own explanation of the facts.
He's a holy man. Holy men don't want to make their own explanations. People are not holy want to do that. because they want to stand out. A holy person just wants to be a link in the tradition, right? To continue the link. People who, want to make their mark in history, that they stand out and they're not a link to anything. That's so anti-Jewish, right? Totally the anti of Yiddishkeit is, right? So that's not what he wants to do. But he's coming to give us the simple meaning. The Medrash might not be the simple meaning. So even though it's a teachings that predates him and carries greater weight, but not necessarily it carries greater weight in understanding the simple meaning of the text, because the Medrash might be giving us the homiletic meaning. It might give us the hinted meaning. It might give us the esoteric Kabbalistic meaning, not the simple meaning. So he may quote from it as a basis, but he can change it nonetheless. But we have to understand if he changes something from it, since it's tradition that it's greater, right? Who's greater? The student or the teacher? The teacher is greater than the student. That's why the student's a student, and right, carrying the link. Who's greater, the parent or the the child? The parent. That's why you honor the parents. You don't honor the child. It's not one of the mitzvahs in the Torah. I mean, you gotta honor your child, but it's not a mitzvah in the Torah. Why? Because they're greater. Not they're greater. They gave you life, and and so on and so forth. The point being, I'm saying, is that you gotta take from the past, right? But when you take from something that's greater, since Rashi's provision is coming to give us a simple meaning of the text, so he might manipulate it. But that itself is a question. Why? Now, he's doing it for a simple meaning, but we have to understand how so. Is that clear? Excellent. Excellent. Okay. We're not going to go through all the verses over here because it's lengthy. Okay. But as we will come back to later, we will see about that Tzaras being the cause for it is Lashon Hara, right? But we see something now very unique in this discussion over here when he speaks about the Tzaras, it's on the walls of a home. Okay, so here we are. From verse 34 in chapter 14, if you want to look in a Chumash, but you have it in front of you over here. You can see it. It's clear enough on, yeah? Okay, excellent. And I will place a legion of Tzaras. The notification that they will be struck by legions is a happy tiding. This is because the Amorites concealed treasures of gold in the walls of their homes for 40 years. The Jews were in the desert. When homeowners demolished their homes due to legions, they found treasure. All right. So in other words, finding a tzaras on your home, not so bad after all, right? Look what happened. You found a treasure. I mean, that itself is kind of a question. How so? Like didn't we just say this was about Lashon Hara, right? So what happened over here? You mean the Lashon Hara sometimes pays off? God forbid. Can't be, right? So that itself we need to understand, right? Now, so when it came to the situation, you had to demolish your home because of the tzaras. So here it worked out as a blessing, right? As Tevye says famously on Fiddler on the Roof, if money is a curse, then God smite me with it, right? And here it seems like, the Jews got smitten because here they found a great treasure of gold, big payoff, right? So, first of all, we need to understand, why did they hide their gold, right? Furthermore, why only the Amorites? There were 7 nations. right, in the land of Canaan. Amorites were just one of them. Why would they only be hiding their gold? Right? So, as we said, Rashi is coming to understand the simple meaning of the text, but he has source material, of course, and from the Medrash, he learns the following. Medrash says, Pasha states that I will place a legion of Taras. Reb Chia asks, is being struck by legions a good tiding? Shimon, the son of Yochai, that's Reb Shimon bar Yochai, the Rashbi, like Boimer is coming, explained when the Canaanites heard that the Jews were coming to Israel, they hid their money in the houses and the fields. God said, I promised their ancestors that I would bring their descendants into a land filled with good, as it is written, and the house is filled with all goodness. So what did God do? He afflicted the house with legion, and when the owner demolished his house, he found a treasure. But who told the Canaanites that the Jews were about to enter the land? Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Nachman, answered. Rabbi Joshua sent 3 letters. Joshua sent 3 letters of warning. A, if you want to vacate the land, vacate. B, if you want to make peace with us, sue for peace. I mean, seek peace, in other words. And C, if you want to make war, come make war. Okay. So the Medrash, first of all, let's put Rashi aside for a moment, right? Seems to be a little more plausible, right? In other words, the Medrash is saying that Yeshua sent 3 notes, right? 3 options as before they were about to come in. Who hid their gold and their monies? Who? Everyone, right? Kind of makes sense because they knew that the Jews are now coming in, right? So why does Rashi only claim the Amorites? Now, again, remember, Rashi doesn't have to go according to the Medrash, but the Medrash is more authoritative. It isn't, it comes before him. It is earlier in the tradition, closer linked to Sinai, right? Just like the Mishnah is greater than the Gemara is greater than Rashi and Rambam. They can't argue on it. The Rambam can't argue in halacha on the Gemara. If the Gemara says the law is like this, Rambam can't say differently. Rashi can say different than the Midrash because he's explaining the simple meaning. The Midrash might be a homiletic meaning, right? But again, what's our question? Why would he change? What forces him in the simple meaning of the text that the Midrash says all the nations did this, and Rashi says only the Amorites, right? Furthermore, when did Joshua come in? Who did he take leadership over from? Moshe Rabbeinu, right? So it's after the 40 years of being in the desert. So when were they aware that they're coming in to the land? After the 40 years. So why did the Amorites put their gold in 40 years earlier? What's going on? And where did they even know? What led them to do it? Questions clear? Good. All right. Folks, yeah, online, we're good? Questions are clear? All right. So let's back up for a moment. When the Jewish people left Egypt, Jewish people left Egypt, a land that was not a single slave was able to escape, and yet 2.5 million people now left. It made the morning news. Walter Cronkite was there, It made the evening news, and it made the news for many days because this was like, wow. So, the so-called civilized world, right, Yeah, they didn't get the message immediately on the text, but they got the message pretty quickly that here a whole nation escaped within a nation, right? It spread like wildfire. We know this even from the Torah, right? How do we know that? Yisro, right? Yisro came because he heard what had happened. So he came, huh? The splitting of the sea, 7 days later, right? Miraculously, not just there, but everywhere else. Exactly. So a resounding victory of the Jewish people that they come across the sea, all good and well, why the Egyptians, they drown. So there's no question that people knew about this. We say davening. Yashir. Then chiefs of Zema were startled, and the trembling seas the powerful men of Moab and the inhabitants of Canaan melted. So they were afraid that they were going to be defeated. As Rashi says, the Jews were coming upon us to annihilate us and take possession of our land. Now, they even knew before that there was such a promise to Abraham, right? And this was something that would end up happening. So there was trembling at the splitting of the sea by the nations, because now it was. Now, when did the splitting of the sea happen? 7 days going out of Egypt, right? Actually, a week ago today, 3,337 years ago, and 1 week, right? Is when it happened. And after the splitting of the sea, what was on the Jewish people's minds and the nations of the world that knew now about this great miraculous escape and this splitting of the sea? What was next? What was next?
The Torah.
Right?
The desert.
Getting the Torah, and then what?
The Mishkan.
Then going to Israel. Then going to Israel. Yeah, the Mishkan, yes, that was, but to go to Eretz Israel. That was the plan, right? That was the plan. Get the Torah and then go to the land of Israel. Now, something happened in the interim, something called the spies, right? But that only happened, that only happened in the summer. That only happened in the summer. This is now spring, right? You know, if you look, oh yeah, the sun was out. We may skip spring here. Uh, right? Um, so the fact that at this point, right, at this point, the Jewish people were headed to Israel. They were not headed to stay in the desert for 40 years. That only happens several months later. But at this point, they're headed to Israel. Now we understand why the Amorites hid their stuff. Now, why only them, it doesn't explain, right? But it explains the fear was 40 years earlier, wasn't because of the notification, right? The truth is, the notification that Joshua sent is not written in the Torah, right? It's part of the oral tradition. It's not written in the Torah. So what's written in the Torah is that the nations of the world knew about this and they had a fear. We say in Oz Yashir every single day in our davening, right? So the fear was there upon the nations that they're coming into the land. So therefore, right away, they hid. Now, the question is, why only the Amorites? But we can understand why they did it immediately. Okay? So second. Here, actually. So Amorites hid their treasures 40 years before the Jews arrived because they expected Jews to enter Israel quickly after the Exodus, not realizing that it would take 40 years. I mean, not realizing. The Jews didn't realize then either at that time, right? So the Amorites were tipped off when they heard of the splitting of the sea, and then made them fear the Jews' arrival and prepare for the eventual defeat. As the Rebbe explains in the Sikha this week, once they saw the Jews were delayed or protracted period in the desert, they had no reason to keep their money hidden. They would not worry about it until it became clear that the Jews were about to enter the land. Meaning, everybody hid their money at that time, like the Midrash says. For sure. Now the only question is, why the Amorites kept their money? Everybody else took their money because they saw that the Jews were not coming, right? You know, they needed money, so they took out their money. The Amorites didn't. So the question only remains, how do we understand that? Why were they different? So with that is because we have to rely on long-term memory, right? Long-term memory, I have a little bit. Short-term memory, I don't. But long-term memory, anybody have long-term memory? Remember back to Genesis? I don't mean creation, not that far back. Or better yet, do you remember learning the book of Genesis and what it says there? Even better, right? So I can't say that I did. I had to rely on the Rebbe teaching me, reminding me, right? When do we get the first notion about the land of Israel? That it has been given to the Jewish people? Avram Avinu, Lech Lecha, yeah. God tells him, Lech Lecha me'artzecha, go, El Haaretz, go from your land, Mesopotamia, El Haaretz Asherecha, to the land that I will show you, right? And so when he comes there, he makes a covenant of the parts, right? And he promises that this land will be for your descendants, right? It'll be for your descendants. Interesting what it says. And I don't know why I never picked up on it before. Well, whatever, why? Consciously, we had this a few weeks ago in the Sikha. Consciously, we see approximately 50 parts in a moment, as opposed subconsciously, we see like 200,000 more times more. So like, what was it, 11 million, I think, that we're not conscious of. There's a lot more subconsciously is happening to us than consciously that we're aware of, right? So that's why I don't pick up everything. Good excuse, huh? Rashi doesn't buy that excuse. He expects that we should remember what we learned, right? So, what does it say? It says, the fourth generation, God says to Avram Avinu, by the covenant, that the fourth generation will return here, right? Be the fourth generation. You're going to return. For the iniquities of the Amorites will not be complete until then. Wow, the verse speaks about them clearly. Who does it speak about? Them and only them. Right? Right? Which that itself, obviously, is a is a question. No, it's a question itself. Why? 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 Why them? There's 7 nations there. Why did Hashem only say them? Right? That itself is a question, which I never asked. Right? Following? Yeah? Okay, good. Now, we know that, of course, Hashem is just, and that the nations would not lose their land unless it was justifiably so, that it was meant for them to lose it, right? So the truth is, all of the we had to go through 4 generations before we would return to the land. In other words, as previously to this, Hashem told Avram Avinu that your descendants will go into exile. They will be in servitude in Egypt, and then they will come out, right? 4th generation, they will come out. But it's pending on the iniquities of the Amorites when it will be complete, right? That's when you will then be able to inherit the land. You have to wait until then. And as Rashi says on that verse, for the iniquity of the Amorites will not be complete. They will not deserve to be sent out of the land until then. This is because God does not punish a nation until its measure is full. Right? Now, the 7 nations residing in Israel at that time, right, were 7. Yet the Amorites are the ones who are pointed out over here, and for good reason. Because each nation has their measure, and the other nations were around the same kind of measure at the same time. But the Amorites, their clock ticked more quickly, and they were the first ones. They were the first ones to you'll let people in if you don't mind. Thank you. They were the first ones to run out of time. Now, interesting, spiritually and geographically, they were the first ones that the Jewish people met with, because many of the Amorites were living east of the Jordan River, right? Their iniquities, their evil that they did, brought them to be more deserved of being the first to being destroyed. And geographically, they happened to be the first because the Jews came from the east of the Jordan to cross the Jordan into the west, into Eretz Yisrael. So they become the first ones that are to be conquered. Right? Not a problem. Houston, or better yet, what's going on here? Didn't download it all? Okay, give me a moment, folks. It's a good thing we have our IT master here. I get a 50% grade because we're 50%. Go ahead. We have to go here.
Come this. Perfect. You want to see it download? So it will pop up, will come here. Wait for it. Open file.
All right. Thank you. Amazing. See what happens. You know what you're doing?
You always know what you're doing.
All right. Okay. So the measure of the Amorites filled before the others. This is why Moshe captured their lands, Transjordan, right? Before Joshua came in. While the other nations were not conquered until later in Joshua's reign. Okay. So this kind of answers our questions, right? Why Rashi only spells out the Amorites? Because the verse tells us, the Torah tells us, right, that based on their iniquities, that they will be filled, they will be first, and therefore they will be the first ones that will be conquered, and therefore they knew also geographically where they're located, right, that where the Israelites are coming. 40 years, they didn't know exactly when they're coming, so they were prepared at any time. Therefore, they hid their gold in order to save it, right? And God did a favor for the Jewish people, brought the taras on the stones of a home in order that it should be demolished and they could find the gold. So that gives us an understanding of Rashi, right? Of how he explains and why specifically they was there for 40 years. I would imagine I'm just even thinking like, the prophecy or the declaration that Hashem makes to Avram Avinu, those things were known by the Jewish people themselves. They knew these. They were handed down as a tradition, right? We mentioned what's Judaism, a tradition. It was handed down as a tradition, right? And so part of the tradition, they know they're going into the land of Israel. They know that they're going to conquer the nations there, right? And probably they knew even that the Amori would be the first because it's the iniquities. The only one of the 7 nations it's mentioned is the iniquities of the Amori, right? When that is full, so that's when you can come and conquer. So that was probably known to the Jewish people, and it was probably even known perhaps by the Amorites themselves. They knew that tradition. I'm saying that. I don't know, just, thinking out loud that perhaps that might be the case. Okay. But so that's the simple meaning of Rashi. But now we want to go a little more in depth and to appreciate the what is it about the Amori, about them, right? That particularly their iniquities, but there's 6 others also had iniquities, right? Why are they pointed out? Okay, geographically, they happen to be the first, but it's not because of geography, right? Not because of that. It's because of the nature of their sin. So we need to understand what is the nature of their sin.
Still, the land, however, was supposed to be there. Somebody from another nation was supposed to be there.
I mean, there were seven nations there, right? So I don't know what you mean by, that they, huh?
I remember something happening then where. It's okay, I'll let you continue. I'll find my words.
Okay. Or see, I don't know if there's a source for something, right? So it says that tsaras is a punishment for 7 different types of sins. The primary one is gossip, as we mentioned, lashon hara, right? As Maimonides, the Rambam explains. Oops. There we go. The change in the change that affected clothes and houses, which the Torah describes as a general term tsaras, is not a natural occurrence. Instead, it is a sign and a wonder prevalent among the Jewish people to warn them against lashon hara, sinful speech. Tsaras isolates the gossiper, making it known that they must remain alone to abstain from their conversations of the wicked, which is folly and harmful speech. Why does people speak ill? People speak ill. 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 What does people speak ill? We all speak Lashon Hara at some point. How did that happen? That's that's the inner reason what caused it. That's true, 100%, right? Story with the Rebbe Rashab and his older brother Zalman Aron. One was 8, one was 7, and they were playing. And Zalman Aron was older, but he wasn't really bigger. So he stood up. He put his younger brother, who would become the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Rebbe, right? Put him into a little pit. I said, I'm bigger than you. So his father, the Rebbe Marash, the 4th Rebbe, saw this and he says, you don't need to make yourself greater by putting someone else down. But human nature is that's what we do, right? But what's the context on how we do that? We usually, very rarely, the context will be deliberately speaking Lashon Hara. You just happen to be with some friends and you happen to be speaking. It's like a thoughtless way to speak that conversation to conversation. Yeah, you know what? Da, 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 and so on and so forth, right? No one is really going to speak ill of another. You're not doing it deliberately, for the most part. That's not where it comes from. It comes from just like, hanging out and, what were we saying, Hamid?
Desire for connection.
Like a lot of people connect by having like a common
Right.
enemy.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I know it's true. Yeah.
Especially in the-
Or even if it's not a common M, but it's sort of like, I'll connect with you because I'm going to say something negative about that person. So that gives you more. So you feel you got more, right? But it's all coming inadvertently. It's not like, you got up this morning and, that guy, oh, I'm going to speak less. It's like you're in the midst of it and it happens, right? This is what Maimonides says. This is the path that is followed by gathering of wicked fools. They begin by speaking excessively about empty matters. And when they come to speak negatively of the righteous, finally they come to accustomed speaking against the prophets and casting aspersion on their words. Thus they speak of the wicked is caused by loitering on street corners, frequenting assemblies of commoners, and spending time in parties of drunkards. That's pretty extreme. But
Pretty relevant.
the water cooler, right? Yeah, hanging at the water cooler, right? In other words, it starts somewhat innocently, right? But where does it really start is because we're empty. And we want to fill ourselves with a connection, right? But it's an empty connection. It's an empty connection. And this is what it leads. This is where it comes from, and this is what it leads to. Yeah. When a person has an empty mind, then the conversation will be empty, right? But if you don't have an empty mind, your mind is functioning, engaged in something, and something of value and meaningful and so on, less likely that you're going to veer off in a direction of speaking ill about another individual, right? As the Rebbe explains, thought is a vehicle and a servant of intellect and emotions. Even when it does not serve intellect or feelings, it continues to function, think, and meditate. However, this activity is not only devoid of content, but also open to depravity. It is explained that alien or evil thoughts are caused by the mind's emptiness. When a mind is occupied, the thought has something to serve, and there is no room for stupid and vain thoughts devoid of substance. Nature abhors a vacuum. A vacuum cannot exist in nature. It must be filled with something, right? So, when you vacuum pack something, There's no vacuum because the vacuum is packed, right?
Sorry,
It's
there's a
a-
quote that I always like, because great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people.
people, right? And when all else fails, what do you discuss? The weather.
Either conversation.
Right. Yeah, very good. Thank you. So a mind that is unguided will eventually be misguided. That's what it means, right? That's where gossip comes from, because it's an unguided mind, right? That is just full of empty thoughts, and therefore, talk and talk and talk, right? How do we understand this in spiritual terms? Everything that we do has an energy to it, right? You do something good, it has a holy energy to it. And you do something negative, it has a klipa, a shell that covers over on the holy energy, because ultimately everything is only from God, and therefore can only be from God's holiness. But that holiness is now covered over. It's in exile. It's been, usurped, if you will. And that's what's giving the vitality to the individual to be able actually to do the negative thing. But through doing it, what it does, it introduces more negativity, right? And the primary recipient of any negativity that we bring of klipa into this world is the one who is responsible for bringing that klipa into this world, right? That's on an individual level. There's also on a collective level. Every nation has its unique character, right? Has a unique character and ultimately a unique purpose, right?
I don't understand at all. Like every generation has a unique character.
Every nation has a unique character, a unique goal that they need to achieve, and hence the unique sin that if they don't achieve, right, that they bring, instead of introducing, goodness into this world, introducing sin, which means klipa, a negative force in this world, right? So there are 7 basic negative forces. The Ameri represents one of them. They're one negative force. What do you think their force is? Huh? The sin of the Amorites is a sin of Amira, speech. The sin of speech. It's in their very name. Amor, right, means to say, to speak. Their embodiment is that of speech. Their sin is that of sinful speech. That's what they are an embodiment of, the klipa of Emori, meaning that the mind is unguided and therefore leads to unguided speech, right? Just based on the whim and the feelings that you have in the moment. Because what is the mind meant to do? Is to guide one's feelings. And from guiding your feelings to have appropriate feelings, that then will express itself in appropriate thoughts that leads to appropriate speech. Appropriate speech and action. Speech, Talmud tells us, a minor form of action. It's a minor form of action, right? But the Amori Klipa gains access to the mind in a manner that it should be thoughtless, mindless, just working on autopilot, stream of consciousness, rather than you're in control of what you feed your mind. Your mind is in a stream of consciousness, and whatever comes in, right, which then only feeds the heart, negative energy, because it's not purposeful mindfulness. It's without purpose, right? whatever you see that, touches you in a certain way and, brings out certain feelings about things, it's not guided. And therefore becomes misguided, sinful speech. So what the Alter Rebbe explains in, here we have the word Amorite, Amori, Emor, the word to speak,
Same
Amira.
It's the same root, same shorish.
Exactly. So the Amori Klipa fuels sinful speech. It can only enter one's minds when we grant it access by allowing it aimless thoughts. These thoughts result in sinful speech. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe says, the Amori represents aimless chatter and foreign thoughts in Israel. Speaking too many words indicates stupidity, as Zohar says. The Amori represents energy that hails from the wrong side, from the side of impure energies that disturb Israel. The Amori do not merely drive us to aimless talk, they also drive us to foreign thoughts. All speech begins in the heart, with the mind thinking mindless thoughts that are foreign to Jews because they don't belong to God. The word Amori, which is in the current tense, implies the constancy. That's the root of the form of the word. It refers to an impure energy that drives us to constant chatter. The ancient insane king traps us into thinking foreign thoughts and speaking empty words. For sin is the inevitable companion to too many words. We must remove the power of the Amori by deliberately avoiding foreign thoughts and empty words. Instead, we must constantly think godly words. Right? As we said, nature abhors a vacuum. Right? When the mind empties of good thoughts, then negative thoughts are going to enter. Right? An excessive chatter becomes empty chatter, inevitably negative, and that's what our sages said. The best thing is for the body is silence, right? Not advocating that we should have a vow of silence, right? But mindless chatter, better silence. Better silence. Right? Now, that is, of course, the so what I'm looking for. Silence is better than the mindless chatter that will lead to gossip eventually, right? But ultimately, human beings are called medaber, right? Which means communicators, speakers, right? From the word dibor. Amori is one form of speech. Dibor is another kind of, is also a word for speech, to speak. And ultimately, we are meant to be communicators, right? That's what we're supposed to do. Why? You said it before. Spiritual what? Connect. Through speech we connect, right? That is the need of a human being, is to connect, right? We're social creatures by nature, right? And based on the soul, we're creatures that want to connect ultimately to God. We want to connect to our true inner self. We want to connect to each other in a deeper, more profound way. The animal soul wants to connect and to feel good. The godly soul wants to connect to be good, right? So to feel good will lead us to mindless gossip, chatter that will lead us to gossip, right? A godly soul will engage also in communication, in speech, right? We're meant to, right? We're meant to. And this is because ultimately that's who and what we are. Medaber, speakers, communicators, right? And this is the Rambam says, in contrast, the speech of proper Jewish people is always focused on words of Torah and wisdom. Therefore, God assists in this endeavor and grants them merit because of it. So the lesson over here is that the Amiri, they're the embodiment of that this negative quality, that this is their iniquity. The human being was created to speak, to communicate, to connect. They're doing the opposite, because what does Saras do? What does gossip do? Is disconnects one from another, disconnects us from God ultimately as a result, right? It's the ultimate disconnector of speaking gossip. That's why to get your healing, you need to be quarantined, right? You need to be separated from the people because you're not appreciating what your purpose is. So you need to be quarantined, separated from the people because you cause separation, right? And the whole point is not merely be silent, right? To not cause separation. No, your whole purpose is to be a medaber, is to converse, is to communicate, but to communicate in a manner that brings connection, bring connection between people in a loving way, bring a connection to God Almighty, bring a connection in. Well, that's what tradition is, right? Connecting one generation with another generation, all the way back to Moses, all the way back to God at Har Sinai, right? And this is who we are. Since the Amorites, they are the epitome of that negative force. Our duty, our job is to be the ultimate force of transforming that, And perhaps this is the reason why it's the first one also that they have to deal with, because we have to set straight, who are we? We're communicators. Through communication, we connect. So we need to take that negative force of the Amorites, of Amiri, and to transform that into a positive force, that we use our form of speech in godly ways, in wisdom, in ways that bring real connection, real connection. So we're transforming that negative force, and that's why the hidden treasures, as the Rebbe says in the Sikha. Conversely, the hidden treasures of gold were found uniquely in the Amorites' homes. This is because the ultimate purpose of Tsaras legions was not merely to neutralize and prevent the chatter of the wicked, rather is to transform the human power of speech. Rather than negative speech, we should have words of conversation about holy topics. As Jacob said, I snatched it from the Amorites, words of speech that are good and holy, reveal the hidden treasures of the soul. So the antidote, the antidote is not, there's a lot of in some communities, they're very big on the teachings of the Chavetz Chaim, of the laws of Lashon Hara, and so on, right? Right, to tell you how terrible it is to speak. There's a truth to it, but there's also something that is kind of missing the point. That's just telling you how bad negative speech is. It's not telling you about the purpose of speech. It's not telling you about how to use your speech, right? It's just telling you how many sins you have as a result of speaking ill of another, right? Of a fellow Jew. So, which just brings you fear, and usually fear of punishment, rather than what the Rebbe did over here and what Hasidus is doing, right? Even though the Rebbe learned this in a Nigla kind of way, not in a Hasidic teachings, but what the power of speech. And the power of speech is to connect, is to reveal, is a treasure. It's the treasure of who we are, what we were created, right? Is through the positive speech that we can have, a real effect on others. I'm sure we've all experienced that we've had a conversation with somebody, and sometimes you just said a word, a few words that were just very heartfelt and very profound and really touched that person and gave them so much strength. Why? Because the power of, even though we say sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me, it's true. You can put up a shield and not allow words to hurt you, which we should. But that's not the point. Is that the point? It's like many years ago, speaking with someone and giving him a blessing, he says, as long as no pain, he says, I don't want, no pain. Live life that it should be painless. Is that the reason to live life? No, it should be purposeful, meaningful, pleasurable life, not painless life merely, right? So don't go through life that, I never said a bad word to, I never heard him say a bad word to anybody. But how many good words were said that you impacted another person and changed their life? That's the power of speech, and that's the power that we need to access. Not how many, never said a bad word. Yeah, you ever went to a funeral and heard that, right? I never heard her say a bad word to anybody. But I mean, there's something to it. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to dismiss, God forbid, that soul out there. Nothing against you, right? All those souls that never said a bad word. But that's not the point. The point of Lashon Hara over here is, what are we learning? And so we've got gold that we need to use. Our words are gold. They're a treasure that can make such a deep impact. So if we are engaged in mindful things, valuable things, things of wisdom, things of Torah, of holiness, that's where we're constantly engaged in positivity of that nature, and automatically you just speak Lashon Hara. You don't have the time for it. You don't have the interest in it. And now you see the impact of your words in a positive way, like, boy, you're going to now speak Lashon Hara to destroy something. Like, where's that going to come? So that's the transformative power that we have. So next time you're in a street corner with some unsavory individuals, right? Say a few words of Torah. So actually, beautiful. I just saw, and I actually have to do something on YouTube on this. Actually, I sent it, yeah. I don't know if you saw. So you have these unsavory Lashon Haraniks, right? Supporters of Hamas, of the Gazans and Hamas and whatnot, right? And they came to Crown Heights to protest. They were there Thursday night, I think. I don't know, maybe for a Shabbos also. I'm not certain when. They were there, right? What do you think? What did Chabad do? We just saw today, huh? So they brought a bunch of kids out, actually, and they got them to say all the 12 psukim, the 12 verses of Torah. They, chanting the 12 verses of holy words of the Torah. Wow, is that amazing? Others, don't speak Lashon Hara about Israel. Don't speak Lashon Hara about, a Jew. Right. By the way, speaking against Hamas is not Lashon Hara. Just speaking against it. That's not. It's about a fellow Jew that you're not specifically, or a person that's a decent, right? But someone who's lost the right to life, right? There's no such thing as, Lashon Hara about them. So, but so the here, like nowhere, everywhere else, when there's protests, what do? Either you're protesting against, right? right? Or you're just trying to wish them away, or whatever it is. It's fighting fire with fire. Here it's fighting fire with holiness, with words of Torah. How apropos, how beautiful is that? Brought out, like there were kids there at the time anyway, so they gathered the kids. Come, let's say words of Torah, right? And a little bit of light pushes away a lot of darkness. And the supporters of Hamas, of course, is great darkness. There's a video I just saw this morning. I'm gonna do I have to do a reaction video on YouTube on that.
Yes.
You can see the yeah, you can see that. Any questions, any comments, any thoughts?
Rabbi, I have
Yes.
a question. Weren't the Amorites the first ones to strike Israel as well?
That's Amaleki.
Amalek, sorry.
That's the Amaleki.
It's the Amorite.
Yeah, you know, these Amorite, Amma.
Tomato, tomato.
All right, any questions here? All right. Beautiful. All right, folks, thank you.